I think football doesn't have enough buzzers.
There needs to be more transparency. Ticket prices are rising.
That's a good question.
Positivity, optimism.
You will be producing lots more English players, and those players may well have to go abroad.
My daughter's team have got a new bunch of people who they aspire to be.
The growth area is the women's game.
Welcome to Football in 10 Years. Discuss. It's the kind of exam question you will wish you were posed instead of something about Henry VIII or Wuthering Heights. To do just that, we have assembled a panel that includes some of the greatest minds of the game. They are much-loved presenter and commentator Jacqui Oatley, Rory Smith, the Observer's football correspondent, and Nedum Onuoha, a former player whose GCSE results I think are even better than Rory's, and Rory went to Cambridge University. He's promised not to mention it too many times. So, as we try and consider what football might look like in 2036, let's start with this. What one thing do you think that we don't have in the game currently that we will in 2036? Jacqui?
Integrity.
Ooh.
Come on, we can but dream. We're not here to demand or expect from the future, but I think it encompasses quite a few aspects of the game in terms of players on the field. And as we're recording this, it's very pertinent at the moment because there's not a lot of honesty going on with everybody trying to con the referee, which effectively cons us, the viewers and the fans. And I think the way that clubs behave with their supporters, integrity there, treating them fairly with transparency, what's going on in the club, because I think football is so corporate now, it's all to do with boardrooms and international executives, that the supporters are kind of left behind. Ticket prices are rising. There needs to be more transparency and therefore integrity.
I do like the fact you've elevated it to such a positive start. However, gentlemen, Nedum, what do you think? What do we not have that we will have in football in 10 years' time?
I won't necessarily say parity, but I think the gap between the haves and have-nots in some ways, I think in the next 10 years will shrink. And it won't be necessarily because we're going to elevate the ones that do not have, but I think they'll put a limit on the people that do have. And I'm not just talking, say, domestically, I'm talking, for example, around Europe. Because in some ways we're drifting towards a point where the Premier League almost has a monopoly on all the best talent around Europe because they're the only ones that are able to afford them. When you see how much money is being spent just from the Premier League, and you could argue even the Championship as well, the Premier League, I think it was just £3.5 billion pounds was spent in this last season, 25-26. And then the next league after that was actually Serie A. I think it was 1.2 billion. That disparity is enormous. And given the way that the Premier League is, the revenue and the money that can be spent is just heading in one direction, it feels like. So I think a limit in some ways there will probably be beneficial to other teams, because if you are, say, a team in France, a team in Germany, to name but two, and you've got this incredible talent, gone are the days where the story is this player comes through the academy, makes a rise, they play for their hometown side, they play for the national team, they do it for 10 years. At some point, the inevitability is they'll go to a side that can afford to pay for their talent. And I'd probably say 70-80% of the time at the moment, that's a place in England. So I think that will change. But maybe that's just me being optimistic.
Oh, wow. So we've had positivity, optimism, and now we go to a guy from Yorkshire. So
I'm going to talk about buzzers. I think football doesn't have enough buzzers.
add buzzers in.
I think we're going to move towards a world in which there's a lot more buzzers. And I think that's something we should all engage. I'm cheating a little bit because a couple of weeks ago, the IFAB, the shadowy body that governs the laws of the game, always with a capital L, capital
Never
G.
rules, always laws.
They're not rules, they're laws. They were brought down from Mount Sinai. They passed a rule that will be introduced for the World Cup this summer, the Men's World Cup, in which, at the referee's discretion, you can have a time limit on goal kicks and throw-ins. I think that will be introduced for the Premier League next season, and I think that the direction of travel will be that within 10 years, you'll start seeing big flashing boards in Premier League stadiums across Europe, going 5, 4, like a referee in Gladiators. And it's the sort of thing we can all get behind. More buzzers is my prediction.
So more buzzers, and I imagine we will all reconvene in 10 years' time to find out if any of those things have happened. But whether it's baggy or tight shorts, muddy or perfect pitches, or just the preponderance of facial hair, I think every era of football has a look. So let's think about how football might look in 10 years' time, and perhaps Nedum will come back to that point about money. This is a game already awash with cash. The bottom line isn't very low. So how will an extra decade of financial growth look like with football, whether it's players' wages, whether it's transfer fees, or whether it's just what fans have to pay to engage with football?
That's a good question, and it covers so many different things.
We'll break them down.
Okay, so we can talk about the stuff on the field to begin with. And I think in the last few years, we've started to see teams really try and invest in trying to find that 1%, whether it's players' availability, so you see more investment in terms of their general health and so on, from an individual perspective, but also from a club perspective as well. You know, there's no amount of money that isn't worthwhile to guarantee you have as many players as possible available throughout a season. And then from also the playing side of things, the money that's available to clubs now, say 10, 15 years ago, would, say, for example, a team in the mid-table of the Premier League be able to compete with some of the biggest sides around Europe to go for any talent that they want? You know, they have the cash to be able to bring those people in.
That I think the direction of travel for elite football is that it's getting smaller rather than bigger, that the parity is decreasing. So in 10 years' time, I would imagine that the gap between the Premier League and everywhere else will already have rendered a lot of those leagues not irrelevant, but very much secondary. And it's something that in France, in Italy, in Spain, in Germany, the big five leagues, or the rest of the big five leagues, which aren't big, they're not comparable to the Premier League. The gaps are too big. So I think you will be producing lots more English players, and those players may well have to go abroad for their starting point, because, as Nedum said, the Premier League team's got the money to attract the best talent from around the world.
But isn't that a good thing if English players who traditionally would never countenance going abroad, would never think about it, that now they have the opportunity to have more of an education, and those of us who've lived and worked abroad, and you have as well, have a broader understanding of other cultures and how the industry that you're in works in other countries. So if they do start or play in other leagues in Europe, or even in Asia, maybe in the future, America obviously is a really growing market. I commentate over there. And hopefully that would give them a broader understanding that then if they are good enough ultimately, they can come and play in the Premier League.
If the men's elite game doesn't necessarily have a lot of room for growth simply because it's got so big, the exponential growth is in the women's game, not only in terms of how the elite can bring in more money, earn more money, the TV deals can get more expensive, but because of the whole system below it having that opportunity as well through more money.
Yeah, honestly, women's football is where the growth is. You look at men's football now, all the execs are trying to squeeze more out of the players, putting more tournaments in, more matches in, and these players are burning out. We're seeing what's happening to them physiologically. The growth area is the women's game. So the growth is in investing in the girls in terms of the coaching, so they can be the best that they can be, which is all girls want to be able to do generally in life, actually. And then as they come through, they'll be better and better with better quality of coaching. And then there'll be more clubs. If you invest in the clubs and invest in the girls and invest in the backroom staff so they can physically be stronger and better and play more matches and play at a higher level, everything explodes. That's what's happening in America, where I'm commentating on the NWSL, and it is fascinating to see.
Yeah.
That's where the growth is.
But in terms of the playing level of women's football, that's absolutely right. That I don't know how many would we even be 10 years into kind of girls coming through and having the chance to have kind of high grade coaching from the very start. Maybe 10, maybe 15 years. There will be another, and this is not meant to disrespect the Lionesses or the current generation of players, but what you watch in women's football now compared to what you will see, what women's football will look like at that level in 10 years' time is, I think, probably completely different.
I feel like in some ways, I'm a significant part of this element of the discussion because my 8-year-old is my daughter. She's played more football than my son. And relatively speaking, right now, my daughter is the better player. My daughter plays with girls who are, say, at United's Academy, Blackpool's Academy, Blackburn's Academy, and so on. And she's 8 years old. When I speak to someone like Steph Horton, who I've been friends with now from well over a decade, she speaks about when she was first playing football, the amount of time she spent playing with boys and against boys, and also the training sessions to where they're using cars like lights, the floodlights for the training session. it's very easy to like get caught in our own perspective sometimes and forget that of others. And I said, "Oh, who were your favourite players growing up?" And she starts talking about Niall Quinn, Kevin Phillips, and so on. And you forget that for them, to be able to see the women's side and to be successful wasn't really a big deal. So now to go back to the women, England's women winning the Euros for the second time, you know, becoming the first like national side to win like something of that status away from these British shores. I was there watching the game, firstly as just a fan of football itself and fan of that moment, but working it knowing that my daughter's team and all the teams that she's played against, all the teams who strive to, you know, to take this game up in the way that so many boys have done before, have got a new bunch of like heroes and people who they aspire to be.
One of the problems with the women's game at the moment, and it's been highlighted by some of the elite players, is about how many games they're playing. It's also been referenced already in our conversation about how many games the men are playing. So with this growth financially and this idea that somehow you're going to have to create more product, are the players going to play fewer games? They're going to be more players at each team to help balance that? Are they going to be fitter, faster to be able to compete with this? Is there going to be some point over the next 10 years where the players' unions are going to say, we have reached breaking point, we need to find some sort of solution? Because if it carries on as it has done, particularly with the introduction of the Club World Cup, are we not going to have literally too many games for the amount of players that play at the elite level?
When you talk about players and we talk about football, our brains tend to default to the top players at the top clubs because we're sitting in a TV studio. We don't tend to go. We were talking about Glasshoughton Welfare and Keighley and Ecclesfield United off camera before. We're all pretty well-rounded when it comes to football, but in TV studios we tend to talk about the Arsenals, the Real Madrids, for obvious reasons, because they're the ones that with the clicks and everybody wants to talk about them. But actually it's not just about the top players. But when we're talking about them, yes, it's a massive issue in terms of the load on them, but there's also an issue, particularly in the women's game, about underloading. If you look at the WSL, if you look at West Ham, Leicester City, Liverpool, who are not in Europe, and a lot of the players are not internationals as well, some of them are not playing games for weeks on end.
Yeah, I think, and the other issue with the women's game is that if you have a really kind of erratic schedule, so the season starts, you play 3 games, and then there's no game for 3 weeks, and it makes it really hard to build a fan base because you don't get into that kind of consistent attendance. I think Jacqui's right as well about the men's game, that the debate around are there too many games? And it's not really a debate. For the top teams, there are far too many games. That's obvious. You will occasionally hear like an argument that I heard espoused the other day by Relevant, who are a company that works with UEFA to organise competitions. They've
done a lot of the pre-season tours in America for Premier League sides.
And they're now kind of, I think they worked on the new Champions League, and they're a kind of power player in that kind of scheduling world of football, the most exciting part of football. And they were saying, well, actually, there's not too many games. There's too few games because outside the kind of elite, let's be ambitious, take the Nedum kind of sunny side up view of football, and say 25 teams. You know, if you're Fulham and you get, it's a bad example, as they haven't been, but if you get knocked out of the Carabao in the 3rd round and knocked out of the FA Cup in the 4th, you're playing 40 games a season. That's it. That's your lot. You're not in Europe. There's no way that 40 games is too many. That I think most fans would be like, well, that's actually probably not enough for most fans, even going back 30 years, 40 years before the great corporatisation of football. So on one level, it is quite a kind of specific debate around a certain number of teams that I think will have the consequence that those clubs, Chelsea are already doing this, Arsenal have done it, they have worked out that the days of the 22-player squad are over. You probably need 27, 28 to get through a season if you want to compete on 4 fronts and you expect to get to the quarterfinals, semi-finals of the Champions League, and you want to get back into the Champions League, you need a bigger squad, which means more talent goes to the bigger clubs, which suggests that Nedum's kind of view on parity might not be right. But you then look at the EFL, say, no one ever accuses the EFL of not playing enough football. There's plenty of football there. It's kind of there's maybe 10 teams at the bottom of the Premier League. And in the rest of Europe, there's an issue because those leagues are often smaller. France and Germany, obviously, only 18 teams. They have a lot more teams that are not in Europe because we have so many in Europe now. So there's a bigger issue there in terms of a group of players who aren't playing enough. everything we've seen in the last 20 years suggests that football will find a way to solve that problem.
So do squad sizes get bigger?
The
do we have 30 to 35 allowable? Or
Nedum is best qualified to answer this, having played for a QPR side that at one point employed 70 or 80 footballers.
Not quite.
But
Nedum was the 71st. They just felt like they needed to get over the line.
The 8th choice right back. If you look at Chelsea and Arsenal particularly already, you can see that they have clearly made the decision, we need more players. Pep at City has kind of held out a little bit. United's position is slightly strange, they've not had the Champions League. I think what you'll see in 10 years' time, for those big six, and who knows if Spurs will be in that number, the squad won't be sort of 23 players, a couple of kids and 3 goalkeepers. It will be 27, 28 outfield players.
Okay, so if there's an argument to say that over the next 10 years that the players produced from academies will be more technically adept, more capable of playing more often because physiologically they might improve as well, and the idea that the more product, the better for financial reasons, and the game will always look to try and find ways of increasing revenue streams. Rory mentioned earlier the structure of the game, so we'll finish the money conversation about how the game is structured. 'Twas only a few years ago that a European Super League rose and fell much more quickly than the Empire of Rome, and yet in the game it felt just as significant. So is there a consolidation that you can envisage happening in 10 years' time? Will we have the pyramid as we have it in the UK and globally, European leagues which don't perhaps enter into that big five or are struggling to make ends meet because all their players and their talent has been taken by more successful leagues and clubs within those leagues? Is the structure of the game, perhaps if we just stick it to Europe at the moment, maybe add MLS as well, will that be the same in 10 years' time?
I don't think there'll be a European Super League. I think the fans voted very successfully with their feet on that occasion that it rose up.
When they came up with the Super League, I spoke to one of the executives involved in it afterwards to try and explain why it had prompted such fury. And they genuinely didn't get the idea that people wouldn't want to watch Barcelona and Man United every week. It was alien to them. That what they might look at and think, well, actually, the problem here is what's a Fulham? Ultimately, it's not a popular thing to say.
That's his second mention of Fulham, by the way.
Well, all right, do you know what? I'm going to do it deliberately to provoke Jacqui. It's not a popular thing to say, and I cannot stress that this is not how I see football. But if you're looking at it from a purely kind of American corporate capitalist view, no one's tuning in to watch Wolves. Not big numbers of people. I remember speaking to someone about shirt sales, and they said that when Ronaldo rejoined Manchester United, they put on an extra million shirt sales in that January window, whatever it was. They normally sell X number of million. Most Premier League clubs sell about 50, 60,000 a year. That's it, regardless of how they do it. The difference in the scale of the fan bases is massive. So Wolves are a big, proud club. The team that inspired the European Cup, the Steve Bull, they're all Matt Kilman, they're all there.
Billy Wright.
Billy Wright.
Thank you. That felt like the most important one. But
yeah, the
first international captain to 100 caps.
Wolves are a huge historic club, but their international footprint, purely by an accident of timing, is not enormous. So if you're looking at it in a totally ruthless, almost non-football way, you might look at it and think, well, they're not really adding anything in terms of our international sale. That's not how I see it, but that might be what they look at and think.
But genuine point, and it's not to defend Wolves or any of the other Fulham or anybody else you'd like to denigrate today, Rory. It is.
We'll try and do everybody equally.
I'll get through them all.
Genuinely, if Barcelona play Man United every week, it does become devalued. And you say that the likes of Wolves are not that valuable to execs, but I would suggest that everybody was talking about the bottom club Wolves beating Liverpool in the league, when even Wolves didn't particularly want to win that game. They wanted to win the FA Cup game, so they rested players for it, and they were like, oh God, we've accidentally beaten Liverpool here. But the rest of the world was going, oh my God, the Premier League, the bottom club, for the first time in the Premier League era, has beaten 2 top 5 clubs back-to-back. It's never happened before.
But
so you need that element of, oh my God.
But,
whereas Man United play Barcelona every week, what can be the oh my God moment that just happened?
But in fairness, again, I'm trying not to be really negative about this. I'm trying to be so positive all the time. Those 2 results were probably more about Arsenal dropping points than Liverpool dropping points. as opposed
Yes.
to a discussion about Wolves.
Yeah,
So-
that's what I'm saying, though.
but
That
it's-
is literally what
yeah,
I'm
but,
saying.
But with that being said, and I think this is something that we're sort of like not really saying in the right way, if the Super League idea happened, not necessarily something which I'm up for or whatever, it wouldn't be United versus Barcelona every single week because there are far more teams in there as well. I think sometimes when we talk about it, we talk about like it's a 7-game series between those two teams, but it's not. And to put it into like a more valid context, I think in today's football, is the Champions League expansion feels really exciting, but it's exciting because you're focusing on the things that you like. Because there are other teams, for example, down in the bottom 8 or the bottom 12 or 16, who are playing their fixtures throughout this last 8 games before the knockouts, and most of us probably wouldn't even be able to tell you what the scoreline was, but it's still the Champions League. Whereas remember some of the bigger moments based around the teams that bring more eyeballs, and I think this is where I'm sort of conflicted in some ways, because I know about the purity of football, but I even know what my own tendencies will be, because there's a limit to, say, things that I am interested in.
So one of the big problems with the Super League, as they conceived it, was none of them had worked out that someone would have to be Wolves. Atletico Madrid would have to be Wolves, or Liverpool would have to be Wolves. Someone's coming bottom of that, and they don't see it that way. They don't. None of those clubs think about. In Florentino Perez's thinking was not. Do you know what? I bet Man City would win this.
Yeah.
That was not what he was thinking at all. He was thinking, well, we'll do this and then we'll win it. We're Real Madrid.
And we'll make more money.
And we'll make more money doing it. But there's also a chance that you put yourself in that lead and you finish bottom and it looks like a bad idea. I do think there will be a Super League. Maybe not in 10 years, but I think we'll be on much further down the road by that stage. But I don't think it'll involve the Premier League clubs. Because the big issue in Europe now is how much money the Premier League has.
Yeah,
and
so-
there will come a point where the rest of Europe looked at it and there are obstacles because they'll have to figure out how to do it within UEFA or out with UEFA, and there's kind of balancing it up with domestic competition and making sure it's open. But I think it's inevitable. We've already got one in Oceania that is FIFA approved, it's Confederation approved. It's not only cross border, it's cross Confederation. MLS is cross border. It's this stuff happens. They're trying various kind of like pilot schemes. They want to do one in the Baltic states across Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, which has some support. They've suggested it in Belgium and Holland before. Nothing's quite got off the ground. But at some point, Milan, Inter, Juve, Real, Barca, maybe not PSG, maybe not Bayern, but the big clubs in Italy and Spain will say, look, the only chance we have to compete with the Premier League is to join forces.
So it's consolidation, not through choice, which for the
Necessity,
European Super
yeah.
League, but through necessity. It's not quite as dramatic, therefore it might have a little bit less pushback.
Well, Jacqui mentioned the fans. There was a huge amount of pushback in Britain. There wasn't a vast amount of pushback in Spain and Italy. Does the Spanish understand that Real and Barca kind of control their destinies? And the Italians, I think, are desperate. They know, they have seen their league decline. It's the equivalent to us in 30 years' time, realising that English teams that once we had 6, remember the days when we had 6 of the last 16 in the Champions League, and then it turns out that all of our teams are getting knocked out by Bodo Glimt. Like they feel that very keenly, and they are aware there will be a sense in Italy that something has to be done to restore prestige. I think I'm not against that kind of cross-border competition. I think it's not a terrible idea. Where I think a Super League would be extremely useful, and actually might make more sense than anything, is in women's football.
Oh, you're looking at me.
No, Rory's looking at you. We've discussed this.
But do you not think
I'm
that
not
Well,
sure
it's
about that.
interesting.
the 20 teams together?
Well, it's
I'm not
really
sure.
interesting. It's
I'm not sure.
really, really interesting because in the women's game, again, you think about top women's clubs, Arsenal, phenomenally run for such a long time, and everyone else is looking at them going, how have they done it? And way back in the day when I first started covering women's football, Arsenal players were paid £100 a week. Per game, the likes of Rachel Yankee, Faye White, etc., and nobody else was paying, and so the best players went there, and it's evolved slowly, and Chelsea then overtook them in terms of the full time, and it's all evolved from there. But still, we only have very few top clubs, and I commentate on NWSL in the States, which I genuinely find fascinating, the commercialisation there and the fan experience, and not talking about men's football, they're not attached mostly to men's clubs, and it's just the growth areas. But people there who are loving the women's game there want to see their top teams playing against Arsenal and Chelsea, etc. And so that's happening a little bit. There's a brilliant tournament called World Sevens, which I've worked on a couple of times, which is 7-a-side football, fast, furious. The top players are there outside of UEFA and FIFA. That's really interesting, new development. And There's new FIFA Women's Champions Cup, which Arsenal won recently, which some people weren't happy about because it meant Arsenal, who've got all the money anyway, received a boatload, £1.7 million more, and other clubs couldn't join. But that's just the elite playing each other, and that's the start of things to come with the Club World Cup as well. So I do think you're right. When you look at France and you see Paul Mary Earps going to PSG and them absolutely bombing in the Women's Champions League, which for the first time this year has had the new format of the One League, absolutely bombing. But at the top, it's always Lyon, Barcelona, Chelsea, Arsenal. And that French league has only really got Lyon, who win it every single year. They introduced a new playoff system to try and give someone else a chance. And they've still beaten PSG in every playoff final so far. They can't get other teams to invest in the way that Jean-Michel Aulas did in Lyon for all those years. And now Michel Kang's taken over the top team. They're only going to get better. What about the teams lower down those leagues? What happens to them? That is the question. I don't know the answer to that, because if those teams don't want to invest anyway, they're not going to be incentivized to invest if they feel they can't break into that elite European cross-border league. But
Yeah.
it is fascinating to see.
Absolutely. Like we have discussed this before, and I think it is a really interesting point, because what you've discussed is basically the knockout rounds of the Women's Champions League. That's basically what it is, with some of those big teams, as you mentioned, whether it's Bayern, it's Wolfsburg, it's Lyon, it's Barcelona, it's Arsenal, it's Chelsea, potentially like United and others like that. But if you create something separate, those are the teams who, in this instance, especially when you look at Lyon's and others, who are the objective haves. But some of the teams in their league, they're absolutely have-nots, and they're playing almost a different sport altogether. Like Barcelona have had, Barcelona women have had cutbacks, the whole budget thing for the whole club, they've struggled. But there's still, I think they've scored nearly 100 goals domestically already. And there's a team down the bottom who scored 12. That's the same league, so that gap is enormous.
What about the style of football? We've had for the last 15 or so years a pep-infused style of football that a lot of people have tried to ape, and sometimes successfully, and now all of a sudden we're in this existential problem with set pieces having too much of a say, Nedum. In 10 years' time, will set pieces matter as much as they have done in the last 10 weeks?
That's a great question, and if I can go to different parts of what you've said, I think for people who've watched Man City closely, say like myself, across those Pep years, each year in some ways has felt different, because there's a little bit of a tweak each year. I think there's certain fundamentals, and essentially, like, he wants to score tons of goals, but he wants to keep possession. Like, the best way to stop a team attacking against you is to control the game itself. And obviously, for some, that's come at the expense of football that they'd seen previously, which at times would be more just back and forth, or more forward thinking, or even like percentage based as such. I get that. That's changed over time. But the set piece thing, I think, is interesting, just because in years gone by, people have always been interested in set pieces, but it tended to be the teams who weren't necessarily at the top of the league. So it didn't feel like the standard for the league itself. Whereas now, as you see, like Liverpool scored tons of set pieces in the past and so on, but it's the way in which you do it. Because for Liverpool, it was about maybe Van Dijk getting his head on the ball, Konate getting his head on the ball. It's obviously talking about the men's side. But these days, I think the focus is because goalkeepers, in the grand scheme of things, aren't protected in the way that they were, say, in the past. So it's a lot harder to commit a foul on a goalkeeper. So now you more or less, in some ways, make them redundant in terms of how set pieces work. So if that's going to be the case, and there's a good chance you could score within 6 yards of that goal, how many bodies can you put within that space and just throw a ball in there?
So it's almost like there's been a loophole created by that attitude of referees towards a certain thing. But isn't this all about, you mentioned the word about Pep, control? Mikel Arteta, if we're talking about Arsenal, that has been the debate, hasn't it, most recently? Mikel Arteta loves to control as much as he possibly can.
Every manager does.
Every manager
really
does, but he's doing it in a slightly different way, which is from a dead ball, you can pretty much control all elements of it. So is it two versions of the same thing almost? And so in 10 years' time, will we just find managers trying to assert control in whichever way is a la mode?
I think there's two things that have contributed to what we're seeing now, and both of those things will continue to exist for the foreseeable future. One is like the spread of talent. So especially this has only happened really in England. Like in the rest of Europe, you can still foul a goalkeeper. Like that still happens. Gianluca Rotti, who's the Italian Howard Webb, said a few weeks ago that he didn't want to see Serie A go the same way as the Premier League. He didn't name the Premier League, but he doesn't like seeing like 6 bodies in the 6-yard box. He wants to enforce the rules in such a way that that's disincentivised. One is that teams are really good. There are so many good teams in the Premier League that the margins in each individual game are really fine. A lot of teams with 5 subs, squad full of internationals, they can defend. They might make a mistake every so often, but pretty much you watch a lot of games and there's not many kind of like hilarious defensive ricks. You wouldn't get enough for a hilarious own goals and gaffs DVD anymore, which is a real loss to the football landscape.
Did you say DVD? What's a
DVD?
DVD?
Yeah. You're not that young,
VHS.
Nedum. You're not that young.
What's DVD?
In this
Oh,
programme
sure.
10 years ago, did they say there'd be no more
There'll be no more
DVDs of own
DVDs, all be
goals?
streaming. No, and so I think in that environment where everyone's basically quite good, and especially everyone's got a great coach, they've got great players, they're really well organised, you need the margins, and the margins are the set pieces. That's why it's gone that way. That is the most reliable way of scoring. If you're a bit better at set pieces, defensive and attacking than your opponent, you'll probably beat them. And I don't see any reason for that to change.
I think the thing that will change in the future, as Rory sort of alluded to it there, if the Premier League becomes the league which is known for those set pieces in that manner, there's not an element of like creativity with the set pieces. There's a discussion around just the physicality of it all and the percentages based of it. It's difficult to create chances because, as you said, there's some really good defensive setups in there, individuals and collectives. But if you can make those people defend right in front of their goal, then your chances of scoring become higher. Unless the rules or the laws around it change, I think people continue to do it because, as is the case with not just football, but any sport in itself, you try and find the most direct way to give yourself the best chance of winning. And if you can make people have to suffer in front of their own goal, why would you choose otherwise?
But this is surely as a result of all the extra information available to players and coaches now from data, and I think we use the phrase it's a percentage thing. If everything is going to be distilled down, Jacqui, to the idea that, well, there's a slightly better chance of us arriving at a goal or a position that favours us because of this, and this, that doesn't necessarily feel like the beautiful game. Arne Slot had some pretty pointed comments recently about that. He doesn't enjoy watching it as much because we have got a kind of football that is both attempting to win and entertain, but also have this very large chunk that says, do it this way because you've got a better chance of winning.
Yeah, there are 2 things with that. So on the one hand, if you've got a better chance of winning, and if you can deliver a ball from there to there accurately, and Declan Rice can do it consistently, why on earth would you not do that to give yourself a better chance of winning 3 points every game and winning the first title in 22 years? It's flaming obvious, of course you would. The other side of that is, of course, if you're on the receiving end and it's kind of sour grapes, but equally, if that is what football were to become, and we're speaking with it being very relatively new, and that's what we're seeing week on week and thinking, oh, football's become terrible. If it ultimately transpires that that is the way it goes, then I think they will have to do something about it. I tend to think that for now, it's just, this is what we're talking about this week, and maybe next week, and then next year when other teams get better at it. I think over the many, many years that we've all been going to football, been covering football, there's always been, this is terribly wrong with football and we need to change it. And I remember going to see Harry Redknapp when he was the Southampton manager, and that week there hadn't been many goals. And so I asked him about, should there be more points for score draws than goalless draws or something? And he answered it very well. But
that is a good idea, though, to be fair.
But that was the issue then, because at that time there weren't many goals in the Premier League and people were concerned about it. So what I'm saying is there's always something that we'll fixate about and are paranoid about.
This season, the Premier League had a big kind of push for, that will sort of be a pun, it's not meant to be, but had a big kind of clamp down in theory on pushing and grappling in the box. And if you speak to the Premier League, they will say that the number of penalties awarded for those offences has gone up, which is true. The problem is that the people doing the grappling aren't the defenders. That's the issue we have with set pieces at the moment, that you have so many players whose role at any given set piece is nothing to do with the ball. They are there to block runs, they're there to stand near the goalkeeper, they're there to kind of get in the way. And that's legitimate, it's all within the rules, but there are ways of tweaking the interpretations of those rules so that it becomes less effective. And I think that is something we will see a long time before 10 years has gone by. What is harder to kind of guess is this the start of another kind of tactical vision of the game? Like you mentioned, the kind of Guardiola, Klopp, high press, high possession football. That's been the dominant form for 10, 15 years probably. That's been the thing that everyone's been aspiring to, even down through the lower leagues. Before that, you maybe had the 4-2-3-1 decade or the 4-3-3 decade, and then obviously before that, it was 4-4-2. That was that was the correct way to play football. It was winners.
Even if you look at 4-4-2.
That's how you were brought up, Nedum.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
But even if you look at winners, so until I don't know, mid-2000s maybe, if you were right-footed to play on the right wing, if you were left-footed to play on the left wing.
The whole debate in the Sven-Göran Eriksson England years is that you want somebody playing on one side which doesn't have that favoured foot. That's mad.
Apart from Matt Jarvis, who's always played as right footer on the left wing, always, and played for England as well.
But there was a dominant form. It changes back to every 10, 15 years. So it may be that we have reached the point where all of those ideas that Guardiola mainly, but Klopp, Bielsa, Rangnick, that they all kind of contributed to, maybe they have now all become so kind of accepted, so dominant, so orthodox, that that's just how football is now played. And the next thing that will take us to what football looks like in 10 years' time is almost a response to that. And set pieces may well be part of that.
But if you think about the last 15 years being a philosophical development of the game, Jacqui mentioned it, data, AI, there's not so much room for philosophies if you are distilling down to numbers. So we're going to make it sexy for the next couple of minutes.
Do you think there's a point where, like, you know, like now it's if a club's having a difficult time, it's like the issues the manager or the recruitment staff or whatever. Do you think it'll be like, well, Manchester United have got a new algorithm, and they've got their new agent is going to sort out every problem at Manchester United. That'll be the next.
Well, we'll talk about AI and recruitment because Brighton and now Hearts do have an algorithm thanks to
Grimsby.
Yeah, and Grimsby too. So, but just quickly on the data, because we will try and make it sexy, but we will probably fail, and then at that point we'll stop talking about it. But AI modelling, if you think about the control that managers and coaches have over set pieces, for example, it's a very Americanized thing. There's a play in the NFL, you can design it. There are methodologies that allow you to distill the NBA down to these little moments where they can, whether it's a pick play that we're seeing a lot more in corners in the Premier League and beyond. So there is a way of being able to control football along those lines, and it will all be dictated to, will it, by AI?
Basically, yeah. The reason they're like set pieces is because they can design the plays. It's your chance to have the game set as you want it to be and to control what happens. And now, like Jacqui says about Declan Rice, you can drop a ball into an exact area. You can make things happen, and managers want that control. I'm a little bit. One of the problems with AI in football is that I think there are things happening already that we would probably now call AI. We just didn't used to call them AI. So they've got these reams of data. They are using algorithms to work through that data to find stuff. Is that AI, or is that just kind of what we had before? I don't know. The big thing, it's always been recruitment-centric. Most data in football is used in recruitment. That is where you make the most decisions that cost the most money. That's where you get your bang for your buck. And mistakes. If you can cut down on the mistakes, then the data's kind of paying for itself.
Well, they always used to say that if the richer you are, the more that you could spend on a player, but the more you could consume a mistake without it being too penalised.
You can bear the loss, yeah. I think what the more advanced like AI models might do in terms of on-pitch stuff is there has always been like a drive to try and figure out if there are certain decisions that players should make in certain situations, if there's ways that you can kind of position your players around the pitch at certain times to have the most effect. I think a lot of it will be stuff we don't see as fans. We won't be able to their algorithm's doing that. So that's why the right back's standing there. Like it won't be that detailed, but it might be a case of in certain counter-attacking situations, your right back has to stand 5 yards further forward or further back, and that's where you get the best results. And it may be that as the technology pushes on, that kind of it has that impact. I think the risk is, and we've seen a little bit of this already this season, the more teams know, you're kind of you're racing to zero. So if teams know everything about each other, they can shut each other down. So whether we want teams to get that level of intelligence, I don't know.
Surely you can AI model your opponents just as much as you
Yeah.
can
Well,
AI model yourself.
Yeah, something I've been told is happening, stroke close to happening, is in terms of recruitment. Say you wanted to buy a new right winger to replace your current right winger. There's an AI model that's coming in to clubs, not for our wider usage, that means you can take that player and their attributes and what they tend to do with the ball, which is all absorbed in this AI system, and you can put them in your team, take out your current right winger, put him in there, and then you can use actual match footage to assimilate his characteristics and what he tends to do with the ball, whether it's dribble and get to the byline, whether it's always cuts in on his left foot, whatever it might be, his positioning, etc. And then put him into your team and see what the outcome is with him playing in your current team, which blew my mind when I was told that by a current Premier League CEO. Said, this is what's happening.
So all this stuff is really, really interesting. And I think the point you've made there about inputting somebody into like this system to see what their tendencies are, this is why in some ways like I have more hope as opposed to this doomsday scenario for AI and stuff in the future. And I think the skill is really turning data into information, but to do that, you need the human side as well.
Yeah, Allardyce was Sam Allardyce is not like an easy man to praise necessarily in a lot of ways, but he was incredibly ahead of his time. So at Bolton, they worked out where the ball would be cleared to most often from corners, and they put players there to lift the ball back in. Which to us now, they'll be like people in their teens and 20s watching this, thinking, well, obviously that's what you do. But at the time, that was an incredibly kind of bold, daring advance. But Nedum's right. They have all the data. They will continue to push forward in the next 10 years to get more data. They will get cleaner data. They're already kind of sifting through it. Again, and I'm not being kind of anti-AI. If we weren't in this kind of AI moment, we wouldn't be saying they're using AI. It's just that everything is now called AI. If it does any kind of algorithmic machine learning, they're already doing that to look for the best fit. The platforms will get better, they'll get more sophisticated. But I think fundamentally, in recruitment, you need, it's such a human thing. Like what it comes down to is so human. Does the player settle in that team? How do they sort of bed in with their teammates, not just in terms of their kind of actual attributes, but psychologically? Are the team rubbish? Has Florian Wirtz had a good season? Probably individually, yeah. Does anyone think of it that way? No. Does Liverpool have been terrible? So it's also kind of dependent on the person, and fundamentally, deep down, I just don't think there's a way that you can ever get like a 100%, like even with the smartest AI in the world, all of Silicon Valley's best, weirdest brains on it, I just don't think you can develop one that can take all that stuff into account.
Isn't that the beauty of football?
Yeah.
Is that when we all enjoy American sports as well, but it is so much more data-driven because of the types of sports they are, that they lend themselves to it. But don't we kind of love football more because you still have those moments of individual skill, of human failings, and the fact that the game flows so much more than other sports means that there is a lot more scope for brilliance, for drama, for a dreadful scenario happening, for Wolves beating Liverpool. There is more, sorry, good. So
You made it sound like that was a dreadful scenario, Jacqui, I agree.
no, but for the random beauty, the stuff that cannot be AI predicted is what I'm saying.
But
Isn't
part of the discussion about AI
good?
is to remind ourselves of the limits of AI. In 2036, we may well be looking very quaintly back on a conversation about the limits of AI, but we will, I imagine, all be sitting in this studio in 10 years' time, still being in praise of Sam Allardyce. So that's an important thing.
That is now written into history. Yeah. No, I think that human side of it is really important to remember. That you can't guess. That at some point you have to gamble. Like, is this play going to work in terms of recruitment? Like, you can't. There's no model for that. But what's interesting on the pitch is the way that this style of play, I think, it has to be related to data. It has to be related to how much teams know. They are trying to work out how they control each individual instant. And that lends itself to a style of play that is, and Jacqui and Nedum have both mentioned it, more Americanized. It's more isolated events, more atomized, more this is an individual action rather than that fluid game state. Because you can control those moments, you can educate your players for those moments, you can prepare for them. So I think if I had to take a guess, I'd say in 10 years' time, football will feel much more like 90 minutes, if it is still 90 minutes, of preparing for individual moments.
Yeah. It's just different elements of control and marginal gains, which is a phrase that we've heard for lots of different sports. How are we going to consume this game in 10 years' time?
I think in 10 years, funny enough, in 10 years' time, I think we will be in the thick of that kind of cultural shift. Not just in way outside of football. Will Sky still be a traditional broadcaster in the way that we think of it, or will it have turned
Will we
into
be watching it on a television? Will we be watching with smart glasses? Will we be transporting ourselves into a augmented reality of the stadium in which we would like to sit in a particular seat that we might have purchased, for example?
Interesting topic, because I think when we talk about how will we consume football in 10 years' time, I think the temptation is for us to think space age, because we've always done that. Whenever we think about the future, we think space age, and now we think everything's AI and everything's goggles. And actually think, realistically, I think people want as much authenticity as possible in terms of absorbing football. Now, not everybody gets to go to Anfield and watch Liverpool play. They just, can't afford it, can't buy a ticket, can't physically get there. It's not possible. But I think what has happened, and what I absolutely can see happening and would be in favour of, would be for the people who want to fully immerse themselves. It's not goggles, because I think you're separating yourself from the people around you. But there's something in the United States, again, it's always America that's ahead of us, Los Angeles, a place called COSM.
COSM, yeah.
You've seen this?
Yeah.
Whereby, and it was a Liverpool match, and it was people, human beings, nobody with an AR headset, but being in this room that is branded like...
It's like a planetarium. If you
like
go to a
Anfield.
planetarium where the screen
Yeah.
is the entire place.
Yeah. So you go, you can buy drinks, you can buy food, and you can sit, and your view is all around you, and you can almost feel as though... But it's a real game. And I think it has to be the real game, and not goggles and anything like that. I don't think iPads in front of you is going to work. I would like to see replays, but I think if grounds can have better quality screens to be able to see replays, I think that's the best you can get.
I mean, given that we're all lucky that we go to football matches professionally, but given this sounds like a journalist complaint, it's really not, but if you ever go to a game as a fan and try and get onto the stadium Wi-Fi and do anything on it, I would suggest we are some distance away from everyone having their own private screen to get stats. Now, and that for football will continue to be the case, but it puts a pressure on ticket prices that I think will be a flashpoint.
And then you've also got the situation where streamers like Netflix, who have a lot of money available to them, are suddenly realising that live events are things that they want as well, which might then promote the question, well, will we be watching, as you say, on legacy media? Will it all be streamed? Will our experience of football be so deeply personalised that we have half of our screen being the football, half of our screen being betting? Or if we're younger, social media comments about what we're watching, our favourite TikTokers on the same screen as that? And will every single experience that we have, particularly from home of football, be something that we have been able to cultivate ourselves?
The thing about fans being attached to individuals, that kind of parasocial relationship that fans develop with their favourite players because they can...
Which the players promote.
Yeah, and they create the illusion, and it is an illusion of having access to those players. It's not. It's a curated facade that they're presenting to you to sell to you, but there is that sense of, I got into football through Cristiano Ronaldo or through Messi or through Neymar, and I will support Barca, then PSG, then Santos, and I'll shout at Carlo Ancelotti when he doesn't bring him back into the World Cup squad for Brazil. To me, like, there is a question there over, like, does that dilute the power of the club? Is it changing the kind of emphasis of where your loyalty lies away from this social institution, which means something beyond and stands for something, clubs stand for something, into kind of another aspect of celebrity culture? And ultimately, that's not how I react to football. Is having a streamer, like, as half of your screen or on your phone or whatever, while you're watching the game, that's not really any different to listening to 5 Live. Do you know what I mean? It's still being mediated to you. Your impression of what the game is being filtered through listening to someone talk about it. And it's a different format, but it's the same principle. The thing I worry about is if people are watching football through kind of their streamers shouting at each other, through watch-alongs, through TikTok clips or Instagram clips, or whatever it might be, is there a point where people stop wanting to watch 90-minute football matches?
And given we've spent the last few minutes talking about short attention spans, perhaps we should bring it to a close with some questions that have been sent in to us here from members of the Bollington Hornets team. So these are young people who have questions about football in 10 years. The first one is for Jacqui, but feel free to weigh in, Rory and Nedum. Do you think there will be a female manager or a head coach in the Premier League in the next 10 years?
No, I don't, because women, I think, will achieve higher status in the men's game as time goes on, but I think they have to have started by being maybe successful in the women's game, but certainly being embedded in a men's club at a lower level to absorb the men's game, to get to know the men's game, to be respected and trusted in the men's game, to work their way up organically. And I think ideally via being an assistant first. So it's not you're plucking that person from over there, sticking them in the men's game. Go on, see how you get on in the Premier League. It makes no sense.
No, I think that's fair. I think it's Hannah Dingley, that's her name, isn't it? Like, she ended up being the head coach at Forest Green for a short period of time. I think she became the first female to do so. I could be wrong on that.
Yes.
But that was because she happened to be there when the vacancy became available. So it wasn't like she was headhunted to find that job itself. Like, I'd hoped that it would be the case, but one of the things about football, especially at the highest level, is the market for, say, any managerial like vacancy isn't just domestic. It's all around the world. So as that has changed across the years, I think it's become harder and harder for a woman to fall into that position because the amount of people that they're up against is far greater than it was probably 20 years ago.
Yeah, I'd agree with all that. The one thing I'd say is I wonder whether we might start to see more women in other positions of executive power. There's a Helena Costa who was very briefly manager of a French team, a French men's team, who then went on to appoint Corinne Diacre, the former French women's manager, as coach. She is now sporting director of Estoril in Portugal, and I wonder whether that is a role where we might see more women in the future.
Nedum, this one is for you. Should heading just be banned outright, given the increasing number of cases of former players suffering from CTE and neurodegenerative illnesses?
I think given the, say, across the years, there's been a greater focus on like players' health and such. Like we spoke before about the amount of games and stuff that they're playing, that is significant, but also some of the care off the field is far better today than it was, say, 10, 20, 30 years ago. So people aren't necessarily limping their way through life when their careers are over. You know, you're seeing people who are playing in their late 30s looking as good as, say, they did in their early 30s or even late 20s. But the heading one itself is a fundamental change within the game itself. And I think that's where you then end up meeting a lot of resistance, because I think you can very much make the case that people shouldn't be heading the ball, but you're making the case to a ton of people who've spent their lives watching people head the ball. I think you can try and limit the amount that goes on from youth football, which doesn't have the same amount of eyes on it or the same insistence on playing that sort of older, more physical style of the game as such. But I think if people complain about VAR and other things like that, there's no way they're going to say that all of a sudden it's it's a foul or a penalty against your side for heading the ball. Because in our lifetimes and during my career, there were points where people were coming through academies because they were great at heading the ball. So to all of us and say that's like a weakness and it shouldn't be going on whatsoever, I don't think it will change, but I'd be okay if it did, but I just can't see it. There are just too many stakeholders that would be against it. I
think it'll die out naturally to an extent. So we talked a little bit earlier about youth football. The leagues that my son plays in, you're not allowed to head it. It's banned certainly until you're 11, I think, at the moment. I think it's very unlikely. I mean, they all do love heading the ball, admittedly. When you can see their eyes light up when it's in the air, they're like, oh, I might do it. But then they get shouted at by their coaches, reminding them that it's a free kick if they head it. I think that the more kids grow up playing football like that, the less they will see that as a thing that they do. They'll get to the stage of 11 or 12, and they'll be allowed to head it, they'll be allowed to cross it, but it wouldn't occur to them as much to do it. I think there will be impacts of that change the way football is played. If playing the game in the air is much rarer, it changes the way you defend, it changes the way you build attacks and all that stuff. It changes who has to play where. I think that is inevitable if we start saying that we're only going to introduce heading at certain ages.
Even with the propensity to have a set piece play.
Yeah, well, how does that work if we're heading more towards set pieces and less towards heading? Yeah, I think it's so easy to say in 10 years' time things are going to be so different, but I'm actually not convinced they massively will be that different. I think it's more a case of the research, medical research behind it. And by the way, all this research we talk about tends to be for the male form and the male brain and the male physiology. There's so much more. That's one of the things we haven't really had a chance to talk about. Is I hope the data sets and the analysis and research and amounts that goes into it will increase so much more for women, because it's a very different setup, different bodies and different reactions. But so I think there'll be more protection, and maybe it'll be a case of how they train will be different rather than how they play.
And finally, this one, I went to the Baller League recently and loved it. It was pure class entertainment. What elements of extra entertainment would you like to see in the game, on the pitch or off the pitch, in 10 years' time?
Well, on the pitch, like I say, I think there's a point where you have to say this is the thing. This is the thing that you are. No, it's not compulsory to like football. You don't have to like football. If you find it boring, that's okay. Maybe you do want to watch Baller League. Maybe you don't want to watch a ball sport at all. Maybe you don't like sport. Maybe you're into other stuff. That's okay. It's not compulsory. But there's a point at which you have to say this is the thing that you are opting in or out of liking. And I think the way that football is, as a kind of games last 90 minutes, there's 2 goals. You don't have like sudden death, extra time, multi-ball. You don't get to change the rules like 3 minutes before half time to make it more interesting.
But more buzzers.
You could probably have a few more buzzers. That'd be fine. But the fundamental thing of the game, I think, stays. In terms of off-pitch, we should recognise that football is a content business. It's an entertainment product, and there's ways of leaning into that. But the problem is that a lot of it involves transparency, and people within clubs, for totally legitimate reasons, aren't going to start doing kind of, like reality TV style interviews about the transfer market. But that is if you want to kind of engage people in more ways, you just bring them inside. That's what the modern entertainment form is open doors, authenticity.
More and more clubs are thinking about the in-stadium experience, for example.
Yeah.
We are so used to seeing it elsewhere, but football seems to be a little bit reticent to organise its game around the fan experience beyond the football. But as Rory says, the football is generally felt to be enough.
Leave the football alone. Leave the football alone. Enforce the laws of the game that need to be enforced to make it quicker and, get it back to being what it should have been. But outside of that, in terms of fan experience, and I went to 2 matches not in the commentary box at the weekend. I went to Molineux for Wolves Villa with my 11-year-old, and then took him to Mansfield Town against AFC Wimbledon. You cannot beat being at a football ground, but what you can make better, I think, is experiences such as meets and greets with players, that I think players are certainly at a higher level being dragged away from fans more as you get the more professionalisation of fans wanting shirts to sell on eBay and stuff. But in terms of having official meets and greets, I think what needs to go back to, NWSL, you go to Kansas City Current, brand new, incredible club, by the way, absolutely incredible. Its own stadium for the women's game, its own training ground. And they have people queuing up for miles at the start of a game for meeting players. So I think making that experience better replays, better screens, and some of the top clubs don't even have screens.
Don't have screens, and there are rules in both Premier League and European competition that limit the replays that you're currently allowed to see.
That might change, I think.
Yeah, controlling the narrative from that point of view is even on those screens. But Nedum, what about the idea of sprucing up the non-game entertainment?
I think it's interesting to mention the question directly. I did watch Baller League. I've watched it for the last 2 seasons, however long it's been. Some of it's to do with the fact Micah and others have been involved, seeing friends playing it. But the first time I watched it through subscription service, Sky Sports. Didn't feel right. From then I've watched it on YouTube and it made perfect sense, because that is the product there by itself. Whereas when it's on Sky Sports, I'm almost comparing it. I skip up a channel, it's just like a normal game of football, and that didn't necessarily feel right. But when it's online, like by the end of the streams, like 1 million people have watched it and have consumed it however they want. If you choose to go to a stadium, what you get is the atmosphere. What you lose is the understanding of what's happened. Because how many times has something just happened, but you looked away for just a second and you might never see it again? But if it's a certain thing within a game, you're never going to see a replay of it, even if they've got a screen that could show you. So I think it's about making decisions about what you want to achieve, what you want to see. But again, to mention some of the younger people, like, in this last couple of weeks, we've seen Erling Haaland on Sidemen. Like, the people who are part of that sidemen group having access to a play like that is something that would never have happened, say, 20, 30 years ago. So I think the fact that these players now can create their own brands in some ways and go into sort of alternative media, I think that is good, that is a positive. And if you want to watch like a different type of fun football with different jeopardy, you watch Bowler League. If you want to watch something really traditionally, you tune into the 4:30 kickoff on a Sunday and you will watch it in that manner in front of your TV. So I actually think things are in a good place because whatever you want, I think you can get it.
Options.
And quite suitably, you've been enjoying this on YouTube. So we're going to where you are instead of the old days where you had to come to where we are. To Nedum, to Jacqui, to Rory, thank you ever so much. We will see you to see if any of the guys are right in 2036. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.